Thank you very much for choosing to come and listen to me today, and thanks very much for having me here to talk, and Shift.ms here on this workstream as well. So, I am Rob Sloan. I work as a service design lead at Shift.ms. Shift.ms is the social network for people newly diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. There's about 25,000 members and about 50,000 unique kind of visitors a month. We've got a design team in the heart of the organisation, and my job is as a service designer, is to sit really between the needs of people newly diagnosed with MS and the potential solutions that we can develop as an organisation to match those needs. So I feel very privileged to have been invited to talk about matching the potential needs in MS variance and care. So thank you very much for having us here. I'm going to break this presentation down into kind of, well, me speaking initially into two sections. I'm going to talk about the overview of the workstream. I'm also going to focus on the why, so a reference to what we were talking about yesterday. So really kind of looking at the needs for a possible intervention. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. And then it might feel a little bit uncomfortable to start with, but I'm going to develop almost like an open forum. So I would like you guys to help set the scene as to the conversations that are going to happen towards the second half of this discussion. So I'm a firm believer in networks and social networks, and I'd like the agenda to really come from you guys today in the second half of this session, so we'll come on to that in a short while. So first of all, I thought it would be worth doing a little bit of a recap. Some of you may have been present for George's talk in the session last year, in the meeting last year, but I thought I'd do a bit of a recap of the lay of the land, looking at the why. So the Patients as Partners workstream is a workstream with the clear objective of developing an expert patient course diagnosed by and for people with MS, and to enable every MS centre in the UK to run with it. So a means of combating MS variance and care by people living with a condition taking more control, and for MS centres to be empowered to deliver this course. So, but before we go into exactly what it is, I think there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, a lot of conversations that need to take place. And a personal objective, well, I think an objective for everyone, every workstream over these 2 days, is to get everyone in the room excited, past the process of developing this. Not coming up with answers, coming up with questions, starting conversations, and that's really my objective today. If you expect us to leave today with a firm idea of what a patient program might look like, then I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed, because hopefully that's your input today is going to help guide that over the coming year. So why? The lay of the land. So this was well covered in the session, in the meeting last year, but a key problem in the world of MS care is diagnosis can take too long. There aren't enough MS specialist nurses and neurologists, and this is a comment on our forum. Despite the lack, there's a definite need for specialist MS care and specialist MS information. So MS teams are stretched, and appointments are infrequent, and people living with progressive MS are continually getting the worst deal. So there have obviously been developments since that meeting, but it's worth remembering progressive MS is still at the raw end of the deal. It was also discussed in the last meeting that despite brain health, time mass and multiple sclerosis recommendations, that the UK was falling quite low in the ratings in terms of kind of European performance. So in particular interest for this workstream, there were low prescribing rates for DMTs, so people weren't getting onto highly efficacious treatments, and also low MRI use. And George talks about the analogy of, as an MS experiencing, living with a condition, the importance of seeing under the hood and kind of being involved in discussions about his care was incredibly important. So two kind of potentially relevant areas for patient engagement and kind of encouraging people to be more involved in their healthcare. So there may be some reasons for these kind of shortfalls. A neurologist is slow to respond to evidence. Eligibility could be restricting prescribing. Potentially cost could be a factor, and bring it back to patients. Are patients not demanding enough? So that's really the key question for us today, is are patients not demanding enough? If they're not, why? How can we how can patients feel comfortable to demand more? So hopefully there's some questions, some conversations will come out of that specific direction today. So how do you measure this kind of demand? So this is one way to measure demand in being involved during care, patient activation. So the definition of patient activation being the knowledge, skills and confidence a person has in managing their own health and care. I'd be interested to know whether this is the correct measure for something like the workstream that we're looking at. Is patient activation the way to go for us in kind of looking at the outcomes of being able to activate people, encourage people to be more involved in their own care? Potential conversation that we can have later. We know that people who are activated do better. So George mentioned some King's Fund research in the last meeting, but this is on the NHS website. So people with low levels of patient activation are unlikely to self-manage. They won't understand their role in their care. They've often already failed in trying to manage. So there's almost like a downward spiral. So if there's an initial failure, then it puts people off then going back in and trying to effectively manage their own care as well. So people have consequently become passive and engage less with preventative healthcare. And also, lastly, people are involved in more costly emergency care episodes. So not engaging is costing the NHS fundamentally more money as well. It's also, this is on the NHS website as well, it's estimated that between 25 and 40% of the general population have low levels of activation. So if we think about people being newly diagnosed and encountering a healthcare professional for the first time, there's a real challenge there, a behaviour change challenge to reach people, essentially 40% of the people that are coming into clinic that are just used to being passive on a day-to-day basis anyway. So not only are they on the back foot in terms of the knowledge that people need to know to self-manage and having to learn and escalate their personal levels of expertise quickly, but they're pre-programmed to not care as well, fundamentally. So there's a real challenge there to try and reach these people. And healthcare professionals can influence activation. So George read an email out last time he talked here, and he'd received an email from someone who had been diagnosed, I think it was 15 years ago, and this person was able to quote the words that the neurologist said to him, word by word. So there's a quote there. So it's not, I'm not telling you that you have a terminal illness. You have a chronic condition, it's up to you to manage it. So just the fact that this was kind of recountable all those years later really kind of hammers home the impacts that words around diagnosis have and the importance of this time to say the right thing to people. So some MSs do have the knowledge, skills and confidence to engage in the management of their health. Some just people do. If we go beyond MS and it's just kind of people in a room around diagnosis. Whereas others may be more passive, and this group consists of potentially those who simply don't engage. So people who don't believe that they should be a part of their healthcare. And then those who expect everything to be done for them. So people who kind of see the patriarchal kind of or top-down drive of information that we've kind of traditionally that's been fostered within the healthcare in the UK. So there's people who potentially kind of fit in two brackets, and it's worth remembering both of them. So I think it can be agreed that people who use services like BARTs, like Shift.ms, who are active on the MS Trust websites or on the MS Society websites, it's probably safe to say that they're already involved in their own healthcare to a certain extent. And this stat is potentially capturing a very active audience, but 96.8% of people who use Shift.ms in a recent survey agree that taking an active part in their health is the most important thing that affects their health, and that's a very powerful stat to see. It's worth disclaiming as well that this survey is for brand new users, so people who've been using the site within a month as well. So there's a definite appreciation there on the part of the MS community that being involved has a huge impact. But as I mentioned before, it's the MSs that aren't actively engaged in their health that are of the most concern. So if we try and kind of filter a lot of this complex landscape, all these problems into some succinct user stories, then gov.uk actually uses this process. So if they ever design something, they will write a user story, a set of user needs. So, for example, they might write a user story which is, as someone who wants to, it could be write a letter to Egypt, I need to use the post office in order to buy a stamp. So there's very it's a very three-point linear story that then people can start mapping ideas against, mapping opportunities against. So I've had a go, these are a set of user stories that we've mapped based on a number of years of running workshops and co-designing with people living with a condition. So I'm interested to know as well whether these are the key ones that we should be focusing on from healthcare professional perspectives. But if someone diagnosed with MS, an intervention should be occurring because I need to be diagnosed quickly. I need to get on the right treatment for me quickly. I need to have access to expert information. I need to have access to ongoing support, and I need to have the confidence to engage in my health. So that's where we've got to in terms of our research. That's kind of almost a starting point. It's not the answer today. So what I'd like to do next, I mentioned it briefly before, and if you're new to the room, then I want to run a slightly different way of kind of organising this specific session, because as I said at the beginning, I believe in the power of networks, and there was a huge amount of positive kind of discussion about networks yesterday. And I'd like to see you as a network that has potential to drive conversations around this topic. So what I'd like to do is to offer you the chance to raise questions, concerns, ideas. If you've got thoughts around how to potentially change this space for the positive, if you've got worries about the role of patient networks in health, if you've got something that you want to lead on, a question you want answers to, then this is the time, this is the opportunity to raise it. And I want to make this session about kind of what you want to get out of it. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to take any kind of, and please just shout out and don't hold back, and it might feel a bit kind of hard at the beginning, but please do shout anything out that you'd like to talk about. The idea is that even if you don't want to lead that session, there might be other people here who'd like to have a conversation. And then what we're going to do is we're going to break the room up into a number of conversations. If you're part of one, you can leave it, join another one. It's very flexible. So to start with, I'd like to open the floor. Yes?
I'd like to talk about the statement about getting on treatment quickly.
Yeah, great.
Do you want me to expand a bit more?
Please do.
Well, because there is something about getting on treatment quickly, but the healthcare professional, I want somebody to stay on treatment.
Yeah.
And I'm not always sure that getting them on them quickly means they stay on it.
Okay, great. Have you got any more? Yeah?
Self-management.
Self-management, okay.
It's an easy phrase to use, it's a concept, and I think when you talk about self-management, you can't just tell people to self-manage. You have to come alongside, you have to support them, you have to give them the tools to be able to do it.
Yeah, yeah. So it's kind of how. Is it just the kind of the fundamentals?
Yeah, how, the why.
Yeah, okay.
Why they're self-managing their condition. If you can explain to people why we're trying to get them to do something, I think they're more likely to engage.
Yeah, great. Yeah, it might be that people in this room have got expertise have got experience in seeing the benefit with people that have gone through practice. So hearing some of those voices in that conversation would be really useful, I think. Any more ideas? Any more questions?
Can I just ask a question? Is there any other patient representative in the room at the moment?
So there's representatives from the MS Trust, MS Society, yeah.
Okay. I mean, one of the things I would really like to know is how I'm falling short. What is it that really, when a patient comes to consultation,
Yeah.
what is it that they feel was missing?
Okay, yeah.
Right? I mean, that would most directly influence the way I would start to manage my service. So it would be nice to get proper feedback. At the moment, feedback tends to be very bitty. Somebody may not have received a form or something, and you get an excessively negative or excessively positive.
Well, that's interesting, because I think the patient, what is the patient missing? I'd love to put that to a room full of people living with MS. Yeah. But I think the feedback mechanism is something that might be something that's worth talking about. What experience have people got in kind of, picking up on signposting, what's worked with patients, what hasn't worked based on feedback. I think that'll be really interesting. Yes.
I think sort of linked to that idea of what's missing, it's like, what do I want? What would help? So from the perspective of the people who are trying to self-manage, rather than us thinking we're doing it, we want to tell them what to do and we'll do it for them, or just design it for them. What do we want?
Yeah, so it's kind of links. What's missing, but what does someone living with a condition actually want? Yeah. And a conversation could be, how do we find that out? You know, we don't have to find that answer today. We're probably not the right people to answer that. But a process of how to find that out would be an interesting conversation, I think.
This is something actually which the site itself, Shift.ms, would be really valuable in feeding back. And if it's put out that this is not a complaint session, but really for doctors to understand, it would be helpful.
Okay. Any more?
The other issue is a bit about patient activation and how we reach, because obviously your survey showing that 96% of people think they should be acting on, that's from a very selective population. What are we going to do? How are we going to engage with those people who don't use computers, who are sitting out in the middle of nowhere, who have no access to neurologists? So actually, you know, we need to think how we can actually engage the people who are well left behind.
Yeah. How do we engage with those left behind? Okay, any more?
In South Devon, we're just about to send out patient activation questionnaires to all of our people on our waiting lists, and then they're going to come back and we're going to have an action day with a course in neurology generally, not just with MS, so that we can then have an action plan as to how we take forward patients' feedback.
Well, would you be happy to lead a conversation on
I'm
talking
happy
to?
to.
Oh, right,
We're
okay.
in the
But do you have any learnings that you'd be willing to share? That sounds like a really interesting kind of angle. Because something that would be really interesting, if anyone has case studies, examples of best practice, then this is an opportunity to talk about that as well. If someone feels...
NHS England are coming down to actually work with us to do it, because we're one of the first trusts in the country to be working like that.
Right.
Just coming to that point, but the most interesting group in some ways, or the most challenging group, are the ones that you send the questionnaires that you don't get them back. So you know, what you're going to do to look at in a bit more, you know, demographics of those, are they people who English is not their first language, or who are depressed, or who have advanced MS or whatever? So they're, you know, they're the ones who want to engage. They're easy. That's
absolutely. And I think the way they're planning to look at it is they're going to have a work stream in the morning looking at people who are like, let's do this, and then they're going to invite a group in the afternoon whose results are actually quite negative, for the use of a better term, so that we can look at both ends of the spectrum.
Right. Would you be willing to lead a discussion on that as a case study? Yeah? Great. Okay, we got any more? Let's give it 5 more minutes. And yes.
So just going back to the treatments, I think patients need to be made more aware of how long the process can take from them deciding as to then starting. And I think a lot of patients think it's you know, they can get it the next day once they've decided. And I think websites need to be more clear as to what, you know, it's not an overnight thing. It can take a few weeks, and because I don't think patients really have that awareness.
I think it's expectation on what's quick as well. So I think sometimes we talk about getting patients on treatment quickly, as in not waiting years. But patients' messages, so can I start? So am I starting tomorrow rather than waiting 4 weeks? So it's what.
This going to be a busy conversation.
Could the NHS not really rely?
And you know, sorry.
So I think on the getting on treatment quickly as well is that some of the delays in starting treatment may be due to the delays or people taking their time to consider what they've been offered and then decide what they will have. So it's kind of like maybe finding out why it takes a little bit longer.
But I think it's an important process. That time is important, and I think we are in danger of perhaps thinking quickness is where we should be going, and we need
Yeah.
to define what we
Okay.
need to do in that time period.
Right.
That's positive.
It also thinks about the fact that do we influence that decision that patients make, and how much is it coming from
Yeah.
experience of the healthcare professional?
So almost like the position of the healthcare professional, I think.
Yeah, and their experience of
Yeah.
whichever DOT. All that big thing.
Yeah, and I think if we are looking for a programme that we're going to be able to roll out nationally in lots of centres, I think it's a very good point, because I'm sure what drugs people have and the fact that we've got so much variance is going to be an awful lot determined by who you see.
Yeah.
And actually, if we could have some more consistent approach nationally,
Yeah.
it might reduce bad variance.
Does anyone have any fears about just the top level objective of a course that can be used in any MS centre around kind of the UK? Are there any concerns? Are there any? Yes.
I have a concern that it might make variance worse, because there will be people who do the course who are already engaged, and they get even more skillful at navigating the healthcare environment, and they push out the people who aren't engaged. So there is a risk that you could. It's a really good objective, but there is a risk if it's just for a certain subgroup of patients that it will make variance worse, because it will enable them to navigate healthcare more efficiently and push out other people in a resource.
I think that's a really good point, because a lot of us have got experience of running courses, and it is quite difficult to engage people to attend. And it's like what you're saying, why are they not attending is the really important thing.
And there are so many patients not known to anybody.
Yeah.
Group GPs will be the ones
And
that we need to speak to.
Do you have an idea of why people aren't attending as well? Is that something that could be unpicked a little bit in the conversation?
Timing is important. People find that they don't want to, perhaps wherever they are in their MS journey, it varies. So I've opened up my newly diagnosed course, don't call it that anymore, to people in the first 5 years of living with MS, because I felt that way I got more people attending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's that point earlier as well about how do you get people who aren't engaging. It's hard to find out why they're not. And it's hard for us, because no one that we've ever tried to address that. Patients will usually give you an answer that doesn't want to offend you, and I'm sorry I was busy. I don't think we ever really get down to why they didn't want to come.
Yeah.
Rob, can you just explain how your buddy system works?
How the what, sorry?
The buddy system.
So the buddy system, effectively, if you're newly diagnosed, you can be recommended an individual to speak to by your MS nurse. So a buddy can be contacted digitally, often leads to face-to-face interaction, and it lasts for 6 months. And you can request another buddy on the back of that, and it's not a friendship-making process. Often the parent does lead to a friendship, which is a positive outcome. But it's really a means of kind of processing the phase of diagnosis. That's what the kind of ambition is for it.
How many of the newly diagnosed people with the disease take up the option?
So I don't actually know. I think the numbers the last time we were looking at them, there was about 50 people who had taken up buddies. But actually, the demand for people to be buddies themselves is enormous. Like people almost really want to give back, and that's been a huge kind of recruitment drive for us. But it's getting bigger and bigger. We just got big lottery funding to take to the next phase as well.
Do you have issues with some people who are not going to be appropriate buddies? I mean, how do you select them, or can anybody do it? So to speak? I mean,
Yeah.
You've got really quite bizarre health beliefs.
Yeah. So what we say is people have to be a certain amount of time post-diagnosis to allow for acceptance. But the funding that's come in recently is going to allow us to assess what's happened so far. And I think there's certain, you could argue that potentially two people going through the same thing buddied up could be quite a rewarding thing for both people involved. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's further down the line in terms of disease experience. And we've got a lot of questions at this point, but at the minute the criteria is that I think it's around 10 years after diagnosis that you're eligible to be a buddy, and there's a kind of a simple vetting process.
Do you find that in patient groups there are any issues regarding confidentiality issues, or is this sort of is there an implicit signature that people will get to know that somebody else has the condition or something just by attending? And what is this area being explored at all?
Well, I think that, so confidentiality on our service has been addressed by the fact that you don't have to disclose who you are. You're anonymous as opposed to somewhere like on Facebook where by writing you're almost disclosing that you're living with a condition. In terms of face-to-face meetups and that kind of thing, in terms of the buddy network, then there are no laws. I guess there's no guidance in I think people just will take the solution that is that they're obviously not going to tell everyone that they've been paired up with someone with MS, and there's kind of basic rules around it, but nothing more kind of strict than that, I would say. But do we have any more questions or conversation starters that people would like to address?
I think it's important also to let the message out. The MS service is more than neurologists and nurses. Yes, they do a wonderful job.
Yeah.
But in terms of capacity, there are allied health professionals as well. Like as a physio, we see patients way down the line we would like to see them a little bit earlier. Yes, I know there are issues with rehab across the country, but I think that's something that needs to get clearer.
Yeah, so it's not only geography, it's the full service that needs to be addressed.
And the process,
and
the pathways
of
getting people, and I think in the right place at the right time when they need it, and to design flexible services so you can dip in and out when you need it.
Okay. Is there a conversation potentially around criteria for a program? That sounds like a definite opportunity for some kind of design thinking. Is how do you include everyone in the MS service in the delivery of this? Is there a potential conversation would people be interested in having around what is going to be included from a healthcare professional side as opposed to a kind of patient demand?
I think so. I think we'll see if people far too late, we can prevent a lot of the things that happens later on. Sometimes it's just advice and support that somebody needs. And are they getting it at the right time when they need it? Okay.
So we've got a number of conversation starters there. So what I'm going to do now is I'll get this one off. What I'm going to ask you to do is to kind of effectively choose a conversation that you'd like to have over the next 20 minutes. Gather around the questions. So what I might do is write them up on a separate piece of paper, then we can kind of choose one, move into a separate space, then we're going to have separate conversations. You can move freely between the conversations. And then what we're going to do is regather in about 20 minutes or so and talk about kind of where we've got to with each direction. Does anyone have any questions at this point about kind of how we're going forward? Okay, so feel free to disperse, kind of take a breather. Come and choose a question in your own time. I'm going to put this on the wall. Okay, guys. What I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the questions. If you'd like to discuss one of the questions, simply put your hand in the air, and then everyone will know who wants to discuss what. And then, as a group, you can choose somewhere to carry on the conversation. Okay? So, first of all, the first point that was raised was getting on treatments quickly. There's one hand, two hands.
Behind you.
Great. Okay. Second question: self-management. How and why? Yeah. Okay, so you want to congregate, and please use any of the space around as well. So there's a room next door. There's seating out just next to the cafe. Okay, guys. So I think there's been some very heated conversations. So what I'd like you to do now as a group is to, so by the sounds of it, there's been some fantastic conversations going on, so thank you all. I think it'd be good to spend the last bit of the session just sharing from group to group what the key points were discussed. Are there any key questions that have been raised or any key kind of next steps? I think now's the time to raise it as well. So can we start at the front, perhaps, with you guys at the start?
Okay, so this was the treatment quickly and influence. Thank you to the group. It was, thank you. It made me feel slightly calmer about this whole thing. So we acknowledge that there is these rules about time frame from 6 weeks was the time to get on treatment. But what we are thinking about is trying to use that time very effectively by actually speaking to patients about what the expectations of that time frame, what we need to do in that time frame, and sometimes look at the eligibility criteria with them so they're very clear about why it may take time, but why also how that time is important, about all the screening we have to do, so be honest with people about is it realistic.
Okay.
And is it realistic? So we had a list of questions that we were hoping to put back to Shift.ms so we could learn a bit more about this. Is that all right? So is that all right, guys, with that? Right. So our list of questions was there, which I can email you. Well, we were wondering if, reflecting on their time at diagnosis, was it realistic to make a decision about DMTs within that 6 weeks?
Well, I think that's a question to put back to the patient community.
Yes, that's what we're asking.
So that'd be great.
And then, what is the best time, do they think, to run an education course on MS? That's first.
Okay.
We had a lot of debate about that.
Yeah. And where was the kind of different opinions in that specific debate?
Yeah.
Well, historically, it was always within 2 years, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I've left it up to, which is very nice to get patients in with back in who've not been seen since diagnosis, which was 15 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
A lot of us talked to our people with MS about Shift.ms, but we weren't really talking about the buddy system, and we wondered what we were thinking there. Was there a question, or was it more just that we need to perhaps talk a bit more about it?
I don't know, was there a way that we could do that better?
Yeah, okay. So maybe that's a conversation that we can have after.
Because we thought that might help with patient engagement with everything else that we're doing. Then to make decisions about.
Great.
That seems really crucial.
Okay.
And the other question we had, which was about influencing people about choosing their disease-modifying therapy, was how much of a risk taker they were. And a lot of us talked about risk with our patients, but we were just wondering about, is there a better way of trying, I hate the word measure risk, I don't want to do that in my clinic, but is there a better way we can understand or talk to people about risk and how that may impact on the drugs they choose?
Yeah, well, I think that's a brilliant point, and that not only is care variable, but people and individuals and decision-making processes are variable as well. There's not just I don't think it's a question of just approaching care, I think it's a question of approaching people and specific needs that people have. So that's brilliant. Does anyone have anything to share on the basis of that input? Okay, so we're going to move on to the next group. David, your group?
Yes. Sure. Well, we were looking at delivering that sort of initial contact, and usually sort of newly diagnosed, but not exclusively, and thinking how we can do that better, and particularly coming back to the people who don't engage and identifying the groups that don't engage. And we've thought of a few, which I'm sure you will be familiar with: people with mental health problems, social deprivation, drug and alcohol, non-English speaking people, travelling communities. There are lots of people who don't. So people, data recognise people who don't come to her education courses, and how we could potentially engage with them better. I mean, we like the sort of buddy system. David gave an example of how a sort of peer-to-peer had worked on a previous job he'd done in sort of welfare system in Peterborough, and certainly that may be a way, but we can't easily perceive how you can get necessarily a Polish buddy and a travelling buddy and a imprisoned buddy. So not quite sure, but looking at other ways of delivering the same information. We had, Daisy saying how a lot of her newly diagnosed people, it's very helpful to see them in their home environment, and you get a lot more information about them. That may be other people's experience, but a lot of within a sort of constrained cost environment, that's increasingly difficult, particularly if you've got a large patch. And maybe we need to be looking at other sources of support financially and expanding MS numbers, and we've expressed our frustrations with the fact that there are good schemes out there, MS Trust scheme, for instance, but trusts are, certainly we've had the experience of our trusts being sufficiently strapped for cash that even though there are clear financial incentives in the medium to long term, or even relatively short term, we can get funding to expand MS nurse numbers. There are other ways, potentially via teleconferencing, Skype, or what have you, although Jay's making the point that particularly in areas of social deprivation, that may not be something that people have available to them. But as a first up, I think we maybe need to do an audit, coming back to what I made earlier, about the people who don't attend. In a hospital appointment system, somebody doesn't come to your clinic, that's terrific, letter to the GP, they haven't attended, off you pop, and that makes my life easier. But actually that's not helping those people who are a vulnerable group. So we really ought to be auditing what it is that stops people engaging the system first up. Because if we lose them at that stage, these are the people who we then see 10 years down the line who are wrecked, and it's too late really to intervene. So we do need to look at ways of how we can engage with them early on.
Right. I think the workstream that Gavin's leading this afternoon and the kind of no one left behind as well, I think is hopefully set up to entirely address that. But speaking from a Shift.ms perspective as well, I think with a lot of digital solutions, that's one of the challenges that we have, is the amount of drop-off, because it's so accessible. The amount of people who leave it immediately as well is quite high. And Nesta claim that 6 months of peer-to-peer is around the amount of time where people have the highest health outcomes and social impacts using a service like that. So there's a real challenge to keep people in the mix using it, to keep people socially active, constantly involved in their own care effectively. But yeah, thank you very much. Does anyone else have any a question or any observations? Okay, next group. Who wants to go next?
Ready?
Wasn't sure which group that. Yeah, this is quite a good time to go because it's a very similar conversation. So our group was extensively talking about what the patient's feel is missing in terms of the self-management offer. And so again, we talked a lot about those people who aren't engaging, how do we engage them, and how do we even speak to them to find out what it is that's wrong, why aren't they attending appointments or etc. And talked about, again, just more how would we find out more about what patients think. We talked about the Neurological Alliance survey that's out today, captures some patient experience and where they feel gaps are. We talked about need to do kind of more focused engagement in those areas, down with patients and ask them what it is that they want and need, and the importance of asking the right questions. So not that approach where it's like, oh, how are you okay, but delving deeper, which obviously specialists are very, very good at doing. I think, just the sort of struggle of how to engage newly diagnosed, and also that once you've kind of been offered that newly diagnosed course, there not necessarily being anything else, like what's the best time and what's the best means of delivering information at that next stage in life.
I think that's a theme that's reflected in a few conversations, the idea of something that happens over, I guess, a pattern or a short amount of time. What happens after that? Condition doesn't go away. So I think that'll be shared with other groups as well. That's great. Did anyone else have any other observations? Next group.
We looked at self-management.
Oh yeah.
So we looked at self-management, and one of the questions we came up with and put to you guys is who will facilitate it. So we feel maybe professionals alongside a person living with a condition, but also giving them the opportunity to feed into whatever this content of self-management is. There's also the recognition that we can't say self-manage, we have to give people the tools to self-manage and also facilitate a discussion. And we felt group sessions work best for self-management because we get a collaboration with other people living with the condition, and they might be able to offer solutions that public health professionals can't offer. But one of the other things that came out of the discussion was around when. So maybe we need to design a survey asking people when would they want this. Is it very early on, or should we make it flexible that they can dip in and out of it whenever they want to? And then it's those who are left behind. Not everybody will turn up to a self-management group as well. So location might be important. But one of the other things that came out is a lot of people feel that patients, people with MS are being referred on later. And that's maybe a problem with a lot of the rehab services, how they're designed, because you have to have a problem to access the service. But we felt maybe we need to have more like a prevention stream, so preventing secondary complications and earlier on. But that's like a whole service that would need like a service design and money attached to it. Well, it's needed.
Okay, so it's almost a two-part mechanism there. There's people demanding the care, but there's also, on the point of view of the clinician, there's a responsibility as well. Yeah, okay, fantastic. Another group? We've got one more.
Can I just say, with regard to self-management, we in South Devon are running a COPE programme. So that's a 6-week programme, which is 2.5 hours for 6 weeks, which is run by a healthcare professional and a volunteer coordinator. So it helps people over a 6-week period to self-manage their own health. And it looks at things like fatigue management, communication, meditation, mindfulness. And it's not just for neurological conditions, but we are running one specifically for neurology. But there's one running for diabetes, any sort of long-term condition, and there's one that runs for sort of a mixture of conditions that wouldn't normally fit into any sort of category, if you like.
Are there any insights or any evaluation ongoing that might feed into development of this specific course?
I'll let you know, because we're doing the first one for neurology at the end of September.
That'd be great. One more group?
So our group didn't really address any of those questions. So we went back to the reductionist approaches. What do we need to do at individual centres to really make people with the disease be partners? So it was about how we should probably train the healthcare professional side of the equation to be a motivational interviewing and appreciative inquiry, the two terms we use in terms of breaking down the hierarchies. And then we also thought that to make this work, you'd have to get together with your own constituents and ask what they wanted, or maybe a problem that needs to be solved, and you do it together. So it's going back to real basics. That captures what I was trying to say. We can't second guess what each centre needs. Each centre has to go back with a philosophy about making their constituents real partners in the process, and that has to happen at a local level. It can't happen at this level in a way.
And I think there was a real recognition that people need different things, even within, somebody working with children and families, and what's right for one family wouldn't be right for another family, but how do you listen, how do you hear, how do you respond to what's needed, how do you design around what you need to do rather than imagine that something there is a right way to do it. And we also talked about sort of having a different kind of mentality around prototyping, so try and fail, try again, find the way together, experiment, find what works, but it will not, you can't lift and drop what somebody else has done that's worked for someone else. I'm really interested in this notion of health professionals having a coaching approach. So how do we teach health professionals to listen and to be able to ask the questions that enable people to contribute and to be part of the conversation? And I think it's, you're being looked to all of the time to give advice, but you need to hear what's important, because the advice will only make some difference if it connects with what people need. So how do you change the conversation so that you get better outcomes for everybody?
Great, thank you very much. Okay, well, I think so. We're going to wrap up shortly, but well, thank you all for kind of coming along. I think what would be great to do, I think it's clear that we need to speak to people living with the condition we need to understand what people need, kind of from a course like this, what questions they have, when they need it. I think there's a number of things we can address through reaching out to people actually living with MS. I think what would be great to do as well is to involve as many people in this room who'd be happy to be involved in a kind of steering group around this work stream. So if you've been involved in conversations and you're feeling kind of inspired by the leadership course this morning and you feel kind of impassioned around this specific work stream, then please, I'd love to hear from you, and it'd be good to build a kind of group of people to take this to the next step. And also, please feel free to get in touch with me afterwards with proposed next steps. You know, if there is another meeting, it'd be good to set some clear objectives for that, moving on from what we're doing today. Rob@Shift.ms is my email address.
So Rob, the whole purpose of the work stream, they really need to become independent of the annual cycle, so we don't think that any work stream should be linked to the annual cycle of this particular meeting.
Okay, yeah.
So if you want to have your own meetings, your own webinars, you must just do it.
Perfect, even better. Okay.
At the end of the day, it's to deliver on that particular objective, we'll call them an objective.
That's great. Well, if people are willing or interested in being involved in a steering group, then I think we've got the go-ahead, and we've certainly got the flexibility to kind of drive this on independently. So please do get in touch with me.
Can I just ask about the formation of a new course? Is that something that the Academy is committed to? Is that definitely happening? Or are you saying steering groups to discuss further whether that's the right thing?
So I see the phase that we're at in the minute is purely a scoping phase. I'm trying to, I think Shift.ms would love to get our heads around the opportunities here, the lay of the land in terms of what are the services that are available, and perhaps there is an opening, an opportunity, maybe it's been covered by other services. So I'd be really keen to have conversations with other services that are available as well to see if there is, see if there's any learnings that we can take on board. But yeah. Any other questions?
I mean, our original vision was a Daphne type thing.
Yeah.
But Daphne may not be right for MS.
Yeah.
You all know what Daphne is? What does it stand for? Well, anyway, it's the course that teaches newly diagnosed type 1 diabetics about how they have the disease and how to self-manage and manage their insulin and everything, and basically gives them the responsibility. It has been quite successful when it's been implemented.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting.
In terms of outcomes,
yeah,
it's very successful.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comparison when you look at self-medication with diabetes as well, in the sense of kind of the urgency and the need to perform that. And I think that's something that can be communicated in a very straightforward way. But whereas MS, where it's such a complex kind of playing field, I think there's a need to find there's almost a need to find something else, like another hook there, I think. But I think there's a lot to learn from Daphne, a lot to learn from the face-to-face nature of it. I think digital versus face-to-face is a really interesting conversation to have, how much of either.
And I'm not sure we need to versus it. I think we'll end up having some will want face-to-face and some will want digital. And then maybe some other thing.
Yeah.
But we don't know yet.
Yeah. Tea and a dance.
I think the other thing about Daphne is the results are really good, but it could be better.
Yeah.
So what people could say who come on with the programs is, yes, they learn something. Some people don't learn anything because they've already researched, they're really good at that, they could remember. But it's providing that opportunity for people to stay connected informally and work things out. And one of the examples that I had was around the dietitian's advice. This is a personal example, was that, you know, if you eat 4 jelly babies, this is going to help you get back from hypo. If you like jelly babies, it's the very worst advice that you could be giving, because you're not going to stop at 4 jelly babies. So, but the advice, so something around people with diabetes sharing those stories and feeling like that wasn't helpful to them, because it's about what it means to me. So if I was going to have a hypo, I would not eat the thing I would like to enjoy to eat. So I'd eat something that would be quite hard to put in, then I'd count in it, or I'm measuring how much of the bottle and look at it. But I think that they're the social things about living with the condition. So you might know the facts, but only those things can be shared between people with diabetes in an informal way rather than formal. So I think Daphne did more of that, and it was built as a together thing, that people bring expertise, and that we don't sufficiently build that into the Daphne programme at the moment.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting insight, because I think that's something that we strive as a service to, that's where we see our sweet spot is the contextualization of the scientific information you're likely to find in other places. It's kind of finding that person who's been through what you're going through and being able to cut through the noise effectively. Brilliant. Well, unless there's any more questions, I'm going to wrap up there. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.